What's good, everyone? Socio guy here, and as promised, my second lesson for research methods is here. And the topic this time, as you can see on the board, is interviews. And interviews is a fun little topic which I will dive right into. And again, this is part of your P1, which is a very scoring paper, and specifically all this stuff that I'm talking about right now is something that is conceptually very easy to understand, and you don't have to spend a lot of time learning this stuff because it can be applied to a lot of different things, and some of this is a lot of general knowledge, common sense stuff as well. So why don't we dive right in? We have three different kinds of interviews. We have our unstructured interviews, semi-structured interviews, and group focus interviews. Now, the purpose of all of these interviews is to get your researcher or your sociologist, for them to get qualitative information. They want to listen and understand your viewpoints, what you think, why you think that, and specifically they want to probe deep into questions. And the first interview form, and the one that lets you probe the deepest into the hows and whys of particular topics, is unstructured interviews. And again, over here we use open-ended questions, and this triggers off a discussion. So this is like a back and forth between you and the interviewer. They'll ask you something, and then maybe you'll respond with something, and they'll pick up on that cue, on that key word, and then ask a question based on that to drive this conversation deeper, to get into your particular thing or your particular understanding about that topic. So, for instance, someone wants to do research on low-income neighborhoods and the prevalence of crime there, whether low-income neighborhoods does lead to more criminals being born, etc., if they want to do some research like that. So they might sit you down in an interview and they might ask you what kind of background you come from, and if they find a particular keyword in that, they'll dive in from there and try to probe deeper, and they'll ask you whether or not, if you think that coming from a lower income class or a lower socioeconomic class does make you more susceptible to crime or whatnot. And this is something that we explore in more detail in the topic on crime and deviance. Now, our second form of interview is the semi-structured interview. Over here, the interviewer will have like a guidebook, They will follow a set of questions. They won't really deviate from these questions, and they can ask them in any order. And the key here is not to really encourage that in-depth discussion. It's mostly just to get some feedback from you, or just to get a little bit of information. And here you're not really getting super into that qualitative aspect of the information like you do for unstructured interviews here. Now, a last kind of interview is the group and the focus interview. Why have I grouped them together in this one category? Firstly, I don't have enough space on the board. And secondly, they're very similar. So group interviews, you get a bunch of people. They could be from all walks of life, and you interview them together, and you just ask them a set of questions. You might explore like 2 different topics, or you might even explore like 10 different topics. Who knows? That's up to the researcher, right? And it can be a free-flowing interview. It can be unstructured. It can be semi-structured. But here, as you can see, the interviewer controls the flow of information. They kind of, to maintain a sense of structure to that interview, to maintain a sense of cohesion to the group, they'll kind of get everyone to follow this path and move down. So the difference between these two interviews, group and focus, firstly, they're very similar because they involve several people, a large group of people exploring a couple of ideas. But the thing is, in a group interview, they are allowed to explore a range of topics, and the interviewer himself controls the flow of information. Like, he'll feed in some key questions at certain moments and control the flow of conversation. While in a focus group, we predominantly just have the group sitting and discussing a singular topic in great detail. Again, that could be discussing the reasons for drug abuse or the rising rate of drug abuse in certain societies, could be here in our country, could be anywhere. So the key here is that they want to explore a single topic in great detail. Now, all forms of interviews, whether they be unstructured, semi-structured, or group in focus, they come with their own sets of strengths and limitations. So I'll just move a bit off screen and you guys can take a quick look at this, because it is very small handwriting and just a bit of information. So why don't you just take all of that in, and 3, 2, 1, and I will start explaining that. So a couple of strengths and limitations. Mainly being, interviews allow you to gather detailed and valid information. And it is valid because it is from the point of view, the perspective of the respondent. You're hearing it straight from the horse's mouth, right? You're sitting face to face with a person, you're talking to them, you're creating this connection, you're allowed to explore the questions in detail. People's body language gives off particular signs. And body language, that brings us to this point here. Interviewers, if they are skilled enough, can judge the honesty and validity of answers on the spot. Because, of course, when you're talking to someone in real life as compared to a questionnaire, you are looking at their eyes, you're looking at the cadence in their voice, you're looking at the eye contact they're making, you're looking at how they're moving their hands like this, like I'm moving my hands right now. You're looking at if they're sitting away from you, close to you, hands crossed, hands relaxed. So body language gives lots of good signals to people about whether you're being honest or you're being very shifty with your answers. Interviews are also flexible in nature. That is, if a particular person doesn't understand a question, you can explain it in detail to them. You can clear up any misconceptions for them. There are a lot more strengths and limitations, which unfortunately I don't have the time to get into because unfortunately time is limited. So let's move on to some limitations here. So, of course, all forms of interviews, they take up a lot of time. You have to sit in for a couple of hours with a person, an hour, 2 hours, and you have to talk to them, really understand what they're saying, and if you want to do your job well, if you want a valid interview. So again, since it's time consuming, that also drives up the cost, because we all know the saying, time is money. And the more time you spend on interviews, and if you want a better success rate in your interviews, you need a well-experienced interviewer. You need someone who understands body language, someone who can administer the interview properly, someone who can put people at ease when talking to them in a one-on-one setting, because it's not always easy to get, people to open up to you. So they're also difficult to generalize, as questions cannot be standardized, and there's low reliability because replication is difficult because you'll get a different set of answers each time. And two of the major points are interviewer bias and interviewer effect. Interviewer bias is basically when the interviewer themselves take a particular position before entering the interview room or the session, and that can affect validity. Interviewer effect is simply the presence of the researcher, their clothing, voice, their sex can impact the responses of the person being interviewed. So that brings us to a short review of interviews. I hope you understood that. I hope you enjoyed that. And that pretty much brings me to the end of this lesson. So stay tuned, and there'll be a lot more lessons coming up in the future, one for observation and laboratory experiments. So catch you next week. Take care.